The animation production side of anime is a niche one, and so there's often many unanswered questions, and one of those is as to where many of Dragon Ball Z's animators ended up after the show's final episode in 1996. But today I hope to shed light on exactly where many have been all these years, and it might surprise you on how many are actually still involved in the modern era of Dragon Ball. Of course, real quick before we get to all that, the featured artist is Antonio. A lot of nice work in his gallery, and the link to his account will be in the description, so why not check him out. Now first up is Masaki Sato from Studio Junyo. This is the guy who animated Goku's transformation into a Super Saiyan and many other iconic scenes. He's also quite loved for how well he translated Toriyama's drawings onto the big screen. He even did the eye catchers, which were used up to the 200th episode. Those probably should have been changed a little sooner, but safe to say Sato was definitely one of the most popular animators on the show. Now Sato's last episode would be 164, releasing in late 1992, but he wouldn't be completely absent, immediately beginning work on movie 8 and then movie 9, with the latter being his last credited contribution on Z. And after his departure from the series, as well as Studio Junyo, he would begin working on another anime adaptation of a massive hit series, that being Slam Dunk. On the show, Sato would handle the character designs rather than any key animation, although surprisingly he wouldn't fill the role of Chief Animation Supervisor. This is a position in anime production that is quite common for the character designer to handle. Although interestingly enough, it was filled for the latter part of the show by Yoichi Onishi, another animator that had worked on Dragon Ball Z, and who would return many years later as a supervisor on Super. Anyways, during the mid-90s, he would also work on Street Fighter, doing supervisor work, and that's kind of the trend of what Sato mostly does for the rest of this decade. Now he actually does pop up for the opening of Dragon Ball Z Ultimate 22 in 1995, and produced an uncredited cut in Dragon Ball GT's opening, which he mentioned on Twitter a couple of years back. So technically GT would be his last contribution on the franchise. But after Slam Dunk and Street Fighter and some other obscure shows, he would move on to the classic street racing series, Initial D. Now in the first stage or season, he does a bit of key animation on 2 episodes and supervises 1, but would be moved to a character designer role for the second stage and would reprise that role many years later for the 5th and final stage. And during the early 2000s, he would be very active in the industry. From just 2000 to 2002, he would work on up to 8 different shows. But throughout the rest of the 2000s, with exception to 2005, where he oddly has no credits that year, he would predominantly do character designs and supervisor work. Some other notable productions he worked on during this period were Interstellar 5555, which of course accompanied Daft Punk's album Discovery, and worked on several Fist of the North Star movies. By the end of the decade and into the 2010s, going off credits, he seemed to have been taking on less work. Of course, there's a possibility he did some uncredited work that isn't uncommon. Sato mentioned once he apparently worked with Naotoshi Shida, although there's never been a show they've been credited together on, so yeah, there's definitely a chance. Even so, he seemed to have been taking on less work around this time, and after his work on Initial D in 2014, that was the case, ceasing work on any productions until 2019, working on a new City Hunter movie. And an extra tidbit is that he was asked to work on DBS Broly, although had to turn it down due to conflicting schedules, and it's highly likely it was City Hunter, considering it was being produced around the same time, and would release only a couple of months after Broly. Moving on though, he seemed to have got back into the swing of things, as he would work as an animation supervisor on Digimon Adventure's final movie in 2020. And then in 2021, he would do more character design work for Record of Ragnarok, which currently remains, as of this video, the last show he's worked on. Now what's interesting is that the last bit of key animation he was credited to was in 2009, and before that, 2002, and to top it off, it was an opening and ending. So it seems he's pretty much moved away from animating these days, sticking again to character design and supervisor roles. And another tidbit is that he still occasionally tweets about his work on the show, and even posts some drawings every now and again. It's definitely up in the air whether he'll ever work on the franchise again, especially after his comment back in 2018 saying how after Shintani's work caught his eye, he gracefully resigns as a relic from the past and looks forward to the future growth of him and other young talents. Anyway, up next is one of the top action animators on Z and the original Dragon Ball series, that being Naotoshi Shida. So out of the many animators I'll get onto this list, and like we've already seen with Sato, who will sort of step back a bit down the line, with Shida though going from his debut as an animator in 1983 has pretty much never stopped since. Even during Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, he was still active on many other shows. But after Shida's final episode on Z, 289, straight away he would begin working on Dragon Ball GT's opening and the first episode and would be glued to the series until its conclusion in late 97. But Shida would find himself on another adaptation based off Akira Toriyama's work, and that would be Cashman Saving Soldier. The next year he would work on Super Invention Boy Kanipan and, like Sato, a couple of other obscure shows in this period, until 2001 where he would make his first entry on One Piece, that being Movie 2. And he would also make his first entry on Dragon Ball in over half a decade with the intro for Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. And I should probably mention Interstellar as well. But since Dragon Ball, he hadn't really stuck to any series too long. That was until 2004 with several Toei series, Bobo, I'm not even going to try and say the full title, and Futari wa Precure, the first entry in the Precure series, which actually had the same series director as Dragon Ball Z, Daisuke Nishio, who was also the guy who storyboarded some of the most popular fights in the Dragon Ball franchise. But back to Shida, he would constantly be switching between these two series from episode to episode until the latter part of Bobo, where he became more active on Precure and would continue on throughout the following entries in the franchise, until 2010 and through 2011 where he sort of moved more to the movies for a period. Then in the following years he steps back a bit more into the TV series again. But besides magical girl shows, what else did he do in the 2000s? Well, he would also contribute a bit of key animation on other well-known series like Digimon and Death Note, and actually would have another minor contribution on Dragon Ball with an obscure special in 2007. He would also return to One Piece with episode 304, and not only as a key animator, but also storyboarding a handful of episodes now, and working on several openings. And much like Precure, is a series he's still currently working on to this day. Now in the 2010s, outside of One Piece and Precure, you can see him on the Saint Seiya franchise and Toriko, but his presence on Dragon Ball begins to increase with Battle of Gods in 2013, producing a fairly lengthy scene. Then he does a bit of animation for Dream 9, a crossover between Dragon Ball, One Piece and Toriko, and then there's the opening and ending for Dragon Ball Z Kai, the final chapters, and of course in 2015 you have a new Dragon Ball TV series, Dragon Ball Super, with Shida mainly storyboarding for quite a while until the Goku Black arc, where he begins contributing key animation and instantly became a fan favourite thanks to his work on episode 57 as well as on 66. Although his work on Precure in this period starts to be quite reduced, but with One Piece it actually remains the same as before. Although like you would expect, Shida starts to begin to be more involved with Precure after Super, albeit 2 years later. Still though, he wasn't contributing as much to the series as he did in the past. But besides that, Shida becomes pretty involved with other Toei shows like Digimon Adventure and Dragon Quest Dai, and his most recent credits have been in Digimon Ghost Game and Tropical Road Pretty Cure. Now what's interesting is that he's done very little supervision from his time on Z, but then again it was a rarity in the 90s, with a couple of video game openings, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Generally speaking, it seems he simply prefers to animate and storyboard, but it's safe to say Shida probably isn't retiring anytime soon, and so when Super does return, it's pretty likely he'll be on there. Now next up is Keisuke Masunaga. After Studio Junior left in the Cell arc, Toei Animation would hire Studio Cockpit as well as Carpenter to help in the series production. Masunaga worked as a key animator but also supervised all of their episodes. He also took quite a heavy approach with corrections, so it was his art style which would mostly dominate an episode, but thanks to his rugged art style and the studio's list of talented animators, Studio Cockpit would etch out their name as one of the top studios to have worked on Z. Now going over where all their animators ended up is a video topic within itself. Some only would have an episode or two on the series anyway, so let's rather focus on the star of Cockpit, Masunaga. So unfortunately Masunaga didn't go on to work on GT, so episode 289 would be his last episode on the franchise. But he certainly would have his work cut out for him, working on up to 12 different productions from 1997 to 1999. And during this time, he would get to fulfill a childhood dream, working on a movie written by one of his favorite mangaka, Leiji Matsumoto. And from this point moving into the following decades, he'd begin to work on just about anything with Matsumoto's name attached, from OVAs to then video games. He would contribute his own character designs, key animation, and supervise throughout many of these productions. Now, outside of that, in the 2000s, Masunaga would work on many high-profile movies, such as Cowboy Bebop, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Summer Wars, and others like Afro Samurai Resurrection and One Piece Movie 6 and 10. However, after Afro Samurai in 2009, he seemed to have gone into temporary retirement for a couple of years until 2013 with a Matsumoto production resurrecting him, this being a remake of Space Battleship Yamato, which certainly must have been another dream come true considering how much he loved the original anime. And he would work on the show as a chief animation supervisor on 2 episodes and contributing key animation across 4. And towards the end of his work on the show, he would provide key animation on an episode of Silver Spoon Season 1 and then 2 in 2014. However, they were pretty minor contributions. Still though, technically Silver Spoon wouldn't be the last show he'd be credited to, as Masunaga would find himself on a TV drama of all things, Blue Blazers, with credits on the 3rd episode. But since 2014, he's been off the radar ever since, with this time it seems to have remained in retirement. So to the next animator, Masahiro Shimanuki. Shimanuki is well known for his trademark effects work and fast-paced action scenes, and has been around since the early days of Dragon Ball. But where exactly did he wind up after Z? Well, like many of his fellow Seigasha animators, he would continue to be pretty active on GT and anything else Dragon Ball related at the time, such as Path to Power and the GT TV special. Although right after the series like Shida, he would also find himself on another Toriyama adaptation, a remake of Dr. Slump. The level of his involvement is a bit of a mystery considering he has no credits regarding the show on ANN, and on a separate Japanese website, he's only credited with supervision and key animation on 1 episode, even though he was definitely in others like 57. However, when taking into consideration that Shimanuki was still a part of Studio Seigasha at this time, and the fact that he was present for all of Seigasha episodes on GT, which were supervised by Kazuya Hisada, it's probably safe to say that every episode Hisada supervised on the Dr. Slump remake, which was 13, is probably closer to the actual amount Shimanuki worked on, which also adds up considering Shimanuki, outside of the show, has no credits on anything else after GT until 99. And speaking of that year, Shimanuki would participate in the classic Digimon adventure Born of Koromon, a film that's also quite well known for being the debut of the legendary director Mamoru Hosoda. There would additionally be some other familiar names on it, like Keisuke Masunaga, Takeo Ide, and Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, who handled the character designs. And sometime later that year, he would wind up on another show that he has pretty much remained on since, One Piece, and right from the first episode as well, before later supervising from 105 onward. He still pops up on other series in the 2000s like You're Under Arrest and another Digimon movie, but One Piece is pretty much what he would work on. Interestingly enough though, he does technically pop up on a Dragon Ball production, as he would animate on the opening for Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2, and again on the opening for Dragon Ball Z Sagas, which he also supervised. That was certainly a unique look. But going into the 2010s, he does again wind up on something non-One Piece related, Buddha the Great Departure, and did supervision with some other supervisors from Z, Tadayoshi Yamamuro and Yuji Hakamada, and actually winds up on Dragon Ball episode of Bardock that same year. Then in the next one, he begins rotating between Toriko and One Piece for a short period. 2013 then begins to mark a bit of a return on Dragon Ball for Shimanuki as well, with the crossover special but also with Battle of Gods. In 2015, with the start of Super, Shimanuki would be immediately moved over from One Piece and now would be a regular on the show, supervising and animating just like on Z. And after his final episode, and well the series for that matter, episode 131, like you probably guessed, he would be straight back on One Piece and is a series he's currently working on. But with all that talk about Shimanuki and One Piece, I probably should bring up another classic Seigasha animator from back on Z, Kazuya Hisada. Now much like Shimanuki, he was known for his fierce action sequences, but with a Kanata-esque touch. And exactly like Shimanuki, he would pretty much stick to the one series, of course being One Piece, also starting from the first episode. And you can see him credited on just about anything Shimanuki is on post-Dragon Ball, from Toriko to You're Under Arrest. On some occasions, they would even be on the same episodes. However, unlike Shimanuki, he wouldn't make a return to Dragon Ball during its resurgence in the 2010s. But he does have some work on it in the 2000s with the opening for Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 and the Yo Son Goku and his friends return special in 2008, which remains as his last credit on the franchise. And from the 2000s to the present day, he's only worked on up to 8 different series outside of One Piece and Dragon Ball, so certainly a shorter list of credits than many of the other animators in this list. And so, if you're a little nostalgic for Hisada, One Piece is definitely where you'll find him today. Anyway, getting close to the end here with quite a high profile figure, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, one of the top animators from Studio Junyo and later being employed by Toei during Z. He would also eventually take on the character designer role in the latter part of the series. And Nakatsuru would continue on in this role into GT, and like the Buu arc, he doesn't supervise a single episode. Although unlike that arc, he surprisingly does contribute a bit of key animation this time around, that being in the second opening and the final scene in GT, and randomly contributes a drawing of the crew in a Uchiyama episode of all things. And after GT, he would also land himself on the Dr. Slump remake, again handling the character designs. Although I guess it should be of no surprise, considering he had been illustrating the brief return of Dr. Slump manga. Once again though, outside of the opening, he oddly has no credits for key animation. Anyways, like I mentioned earlier, Nakatsuru would also work on the first Digimon film, handling its character designs. But unlike Masunaga and Shimanuki, Nakatsuru would be heavily involved with the Digimon franchise in this era, now being one of the main character designers and contributing key animation on occasion. In 2004, Nakatsuru would be moved over to Beat the Vandal Buster, doing what he does most in this decade, character designs. But like you would expect, Nakatsuru also finally makes his way over to One Piece in 2005 for the 6th movie, which was also Masunaga's first entry like we saw before. And Nakatsuru also does his first bit of work on the Naruto series with Naruto Movie 2 that same year. However, after Beat the Vandal Buster, Nakatsuru doesn't really stick to a specific show, finding himself on mostly movies for the rest of the decade, such as The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, another Naruto film, and Summer Wars, amongst several other things. But he would also make his own little return on Dragon Ball in 2007 with In a Short Animated Feature, and find himself on another production with Dragon in the title, The Blue Dragon Anime, an adaptation by Studio Pierrot of the video game series, which Toriyama was also heavily involved in. What's interesting about this production is that it sees Nakatsuru, for the first time since the late 90s, creating character sheets based off Akira Toriyama's designs. He also seemed to have had a small bit of key animation in episode 5. And in 2008, there's then the Yo Son Goku and his friends return special. Now going off credits, it might seem like he didn't work on anything Dragon Ball related besides those specials, and animation wise, unless there's some other obscure TV ad out there, that is the case. However, Nakatsuru would still be putting out multiple Dragon Ball illustrations for several other video game covers, the Dragon Ball Z anime manga series, and even collab with Toriyama himself for the cover of a book. Moving on to the 2010s now, the first project would be Halo related with an anthology series, Halo Legends, and Nakatsuru for Toei's episode would handle the character designs and is naturally the chief animation supervisor, as well as providing key animation. You also have good old Daisuke Nishio directing this episode, which marks the first time these two have been paired together since 1992, but that's surprisingly all he works on in 2010. It's possible he was taking on less work around this period. In 2009, the only production he's credited to is Summer Wars. 2008, he has about 2 credits, and there's then Blue Dragon and that obscure special in 2007. And yeah, in 2011, it's kind of the same thing with a movie and a single episode on One Piece. I still wouldn't treat everything just said as an absolute, considering you have little projects like that 2007 special, which isn't listed on any official site, and for whatever reason he has no credits to Blue Dragon either, despite doing the character designs. So there's always a chance that he did some other unknown work during this period and was simply never credited. Nakatsuru must have been recharged though, because he continues on One Piece through 2012, makes an appearance on Toriko, and then moves on to Kingdom later in the year. In 2013 he finishes up on Kingdom and One Piece, and oddly hasn't returned on either since. However, like Shida and Shimanuki, Nakatsuru would also be present for Battle of Gods, animating a great little scene with some excellent character acting. In the following years, there would be a couple of more movies like The Last Naruto the Movie, and he even makes an appearance on One Punch Man's first episode in 2015. Pity we don't know what portion he handled. 2015 though also marks, I guess, another brief return to Dragon Ball. Nakatsuru works on a short scene in a commercial. He's also there for Super's first episode, as well as Resurrection F, which actually remains his last bit of work on the franchise. Moving on, he makes another return, this time to Digimon for the first time in a long time, In 2017, he does key animation on one episode for Black Clover, until later returning in 2018 and becomes fairly active on the show, which is definitely a rarity for him. And I should probably mention his work on another Hisada film, Mirai. In 2019, there's oddly nothing he's credited to, but in 2020, quite fittingly, he returns as character designer on a Digimon production, another first in over a decade, for the final Digimon Adventure movie. However, this time it wouldn't be a once-off, going on to handle the designs for a reboot of the Digimon Adventure TV series in 2021, which is currently his latest credit. Far as I'm aware though, that's all he contributed to that series, and with the show ending later this year, I can't help but wonder what he'll work on next. He's improved so much since his old days on Z, and he was already incredible then, so it'd be great to see him on the franchise again. But with that though, brings us to the end of what some of the top animators from Z have been up to all these years. Of course, I couldn't mention everyone for the sake of time and brevity, although I have no doubt people will be in the comments asking why I didn't mention X animator, even after saying that, but yeah, I hope you found it interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.